Welcome to a special edition of New Scientist podcast, The World, the Universe and Us, recorded live at the Royal Society in London. I'm Rowan Hooper.
And I'm Abby Beale. Now, earlier this year, the Royal Society published a report on space exploration over the next 50 years called Space 2075. And that's the starting point for our discussion this evening. We're here to explore space travel in the future, and to do that, we are delighted to welcome three very special guests. So let's introduce them. We have the first British astronaut, Helen Sharman. Helen was part of a Soyuz mission in 1991, and she spent 7 days in space.
Hello. And then next to Helen, we have Irene Di Giulio. She's a biomedical engineer at King's College London. And one of the projects that Irene is working on is helping to get the first disabled astronaut into space. And we're going to hear about that. So welcome, Irene. And then Katie King, who's CEO of BioOrbit, and that's a pharmaceuticals company who plan to make drugs in space. So let's give them all another round of applause. Welcome all. So let's start by asking Helen Sharman. I mean, probably there's only two people here who've heard our podcast before. I bet no one, apart from Helen, has been to space. I want to ask what it's like, but before that, let's have another show of hands. Who would like to go into space if they had the chance? Hands up, including people on the panel. Okay, so it's roughly half, I'd say, a bit more than half the people in the room. And hands up who definitely would not want to go to space. So Abby. And a few scattered people in the audience who don't want to go to space. Interesting. We'll get back to that, I think. Helen, let's start with you describing tell us a bit about the experience of space travel. I mean, we know that it's been shown that just a few minutes in space already starts to cause changes in the body. And how was it for you? How did it feel?
The first feeling that you get, actually, when you start to feel weightless, as soon as that final rocket stage shuts out, you're feeling weightless, even though you're still strapped into the seat. But I was aware that my back wasn't always in contact with the seat behind me. So sometimes I was sort of more forcing forward on the straps and sometimes not. So the sweat down my back could dry off a bit. So you realise then how hot you've become sitting in that seat. But no, then fairly rapidly, within the next few hours, you start to feel this fluid shift that tends to move, so more fluid than normal tends to come towards the upper chest and head. And that feels a little uncomfortable. Yeah. And it takes a few days for the body to adapt to that. And the fluid sort of shifts around in different places in the body. So you lose blood plasma volume, that kind of thing. Yeah. But yes, some astronauts get headaches. We all feel stuffy, and you get these sort of fat, puffy features. It's rather unattractively called chicken legs or bird legs, puffy head. So, and so yeah, it's we alleviate it a bit by thick elastic straps around the tops of our legs, which tends to keep the body fluids in our legs a bit more, but those themselves, the elastic straps, are uncomfortable. But no, that makes it sound really bad, and it's not really bad. It is just the most glorious thing. So feeling weightless, that's the big thing, and that's where the big challenges for the physical parts of the human body are. You get that amazing camaraderie with the crew, and then looking out of the views as well, the views of Earth and the stars, of course. So I think being in space, you get this complete mixture of feelings and experiences. And yes, of course, like any job, there are the very intense, focused moments and the slightly stressful moments, but there are also times of complete serenity. And I just remember it as being a very natural feeling. And while we miss our family and friends, and we miss the weather on Earth, the rain on your face and the wind in your hair, somehow there's a sense of belonging in space.
Wow.
As well.
So you adapted very quickly to it feeling like an environment that you could exist in quite happily.
It feels like home because the simulator we've been in for hundreds of hours before. So it's a spacecraft that we're in for the transporting to the space station. And then the space station itself, we've been in the simulator of that as well. So it's in terms of it feeling like a home, and we know where the light switches are and what does what, But also because you're with people that you trust and you're in communication to mission control, and all the teams there that you also trust because you've done your training with them. I think, yes, it is just a very relaxed place. All you're doing actually in space is the job that you've been trained to do. The tough times happen in the training.
Right. Well, we might get onto the training later.
And Katie, so you want to make medicine in space. Would you like to go there to make the drugs, or would you rather send someone else for you?
I would love to go. I think if I could design it that it would only recognize my eyes to turn it on, then that would be great. I'm joking. I would love the opportunity to go. But humans, we contaminate things. So if we're making drugs in space, it needs to be very sterile. So automation is where it's going.
So eventually you think your products, we'll get onto what your ideas are in a bit, but we won't need humans in space for what it'll be cheaper and safer and easier, better to just have it automated.
Definitely later down the line, there's a lot of technical challenges to get to that point. So I think initially we will need humans when we're at a certain scale, just to replenish reagents and collect the output medicines to send them back down to Earth. But in time, I see that becoming all automated and robotic.
We will get onto the sort of pros and cons of robots in space versus humans in space a bit later. Irene, tell us about your work supporting astronauts with disabilities.
So what we are doing is, we started a few years ago, and we got a bit of a boost since the European Space Agency has recruited a new astronaut corps. And in 2022, they recruited the first astronaut with a physical impairment. Our research is alongside this project. This project is now called FLY. They recruited the astronaut. We are doing the science behind it. My scientific hypothesis is that people with physical impairments may be better than able-bodied astronauts in space. People say the space environment is debilitating for the body, which is true. And what we are doing is, as a big research team, we are going to study the whole physiology of this first astronaut with physical impairments and try to understand the adaptability to space. The mission is not confirmed yet, but the idea that we're working towards a 2027 date for a mission. It could be a long-term mission, could be a short-term mission, certainly on the ISS, the International Space Station. And yes, so stay tuned, because this is what I always say is, hopefully this first astronaut is going to be the first of many. We're working in that direction. We're not just focusing on his particular impairment. He has a lower limb amputation. We are working more broadly, and we are looking at different impairments and how they may adapt to space flight.
So can I ask a question? Because, I talked about these bird legs, but that's because, as I understand it, each leg contributes about 1 litre of fluid that goes towards the upper chest because it's no longer pulled down by gravity. So if you were then without a leg or part of your leg, that I can see being quite beneficial. But if you were without something else, that would be less beneficial. Does that make sense?
So one of my scientific hypotheses, you're totally right, is lower limb amputation, mainly bilateral, will be probably the test bench for this type of hypothesis. This particular astronaut has a unilateral amputation, and we're going to test the difference between the two lower limbs, the two legs, the prosthetic one or the amputated one, and the remaining one. And it's not just the fluids, it's also, in space, we have bone wasting, we have muscle wasting, tend to occur in the lower limb, so in the legs. Not having them, an advantage maybe? Don't know. It's an hypothesis. We're going to test it. And loads of other adaptations that may be either the same, so that's the testing hypothesis, no real differences in performance, or maybe even slightly better.
But it'd be huge, wouldn't it? Because I think there's still a sort of test pilot idea of amongst astronauts that I guess we might think of Apollo and even Gemini and how you had to be almost always a test pilot to get into those programs, and that's probably is it. I mean, there's still a leftover feeling that that's what an astronaut is. But then we do break the mold, and we have changed it. But then to have someone with disabilities would change it again.
And that's why it's exciting.
Yeah.
And also, in terms of society, how can that change the perception of disability in society on Earth? So there is also that aspect. But it's not just, people think tokenism. No, there is a scientific hypothesis. There is a whole team at European Space Agency and beyond actually pushing in that direction to make space flight accessible. And you're right, traditionally, we are going in the direction of super fit astronauts. But what we know about adaptations of the body to space is very biased on very super fit astronauts, and not disrespect male majority so far. So there is so much more that we can do and so much more that we can learn from this. And this is the opportunity.
I noticed, Irene, when Rowan asked about if we wanted to go to space, you seemed a bit hesitant. Would you not like to go?
My answer is it depends. Because of what the space environment does to the human body, long missions are very taxing. But my mission is to try to make a space accessible. So if you want to go, my job is to try to help you go. So that is how I see it. Short mission, maybe the feeling of weightlessness, maybe that will be fun. But, I'm seasick and all of that. maybe not for me.
Maybe not.
But that's the other thing. Women are more motion sickness and may experience more sickness in space. We don't know why. And not enough research has been done on that.
Yeah, so we've got 3 really different perspectives there on space travel. One thing I'm really interested in is why people want to go into space on an individual level, but also as a society. So Helen, what was it that made you want to go?
I was really quite selfishly thinking, not actually about going into space when I applied for the job of being a British astronaut, but I was thinking about the training. So I like variety. I think we all like a bit of variety in life. And what other job can you do learn about space technology and experiments that you can do in space, train amongst other astronauts, cosmonauts, learn to speak a new language. So all my training was going to be done in the Russian language. Do physical training as part of your job, right? Not have to do it when you're so tired in the evening after a full day of work. It's part of the job to do all that. And also for me, it was my training was all starting towards the end of the Cold War. So that fascination of what was the Soviet Union and life there and living in Star City near Moscow in that very exciting time of that transition as communism was just coming towards its end there in the Soviet Union. Just all of that attracted me. And of course, once I was there, I started really thinking about the space flight. And the more I thought about what we can do in space that we just can't do on Earth. Not just for me doing somersaults and things, but really, the science brain in me was thinking all of these fantastic things that we can do. The more I thought about that, the more I really wanted to go.
Katie, your company, BioOrbit, so it's not so much about exploration as doing things in microgravity and the opportunities that brings. So tell us about that.
Yes, of course. So space is an incredible place, and it's a very different environment to here on Earth, and microgravity being one of the key pieces, and that affects different fundamental phenomena. So sedimentation is something that happens on Earth but doesn't happen in space, and convection currents as well, something that's induced by gravity. Now, when we're dealing with materials and drugs and chemicals, you can form different structures in space where you don't have sedimentation and you don't have convection currents versus here on Earth. So the particular use case is with crystallization. So crystallization is a far superior process in space versus on Earth, and this is shown across so many different material types. So semiconductors is one, so you can get much more perfect semiconductors in space. And there's actually a company called Spaceforge out in Wales who are building the facilities to make semiconductors in space and bring them back down. But at BioOrbit, what we're doing is we're crystallizing drugs in space, specifically antibodies. And so through crystallizing antibodies, you can form really concentrated drug solutions, which basically mean that you can take a drug that typically you would have to have injected in the vein and turn it into a really concentrated injectable shot that you can take at home. So we want to turn cancer treatments from something that you have to go to hospital for into something that you can stay at home and inject yourself with. And you can't get that quality of crystal needed on Earth. You can get it in space. So we are building the hardware to mass produce these crystals so that they can be used back here on Earth.
I was going to say, you want them mass produced, otherwise it's going to be really expensive, isn't it?
Exactly.
Getting it from space.
Yeah, and the unit economics now work because of SpaceX really decreasing that cost of launch of mass into orbit. So it wasn't feasible even a few years ago.
Yeah. Helen?
Well, I grew some protein crystals in space, and of course it's been done for a long time, but when astronauts do them, they're done on a very, very small scale, and we're growing them to get the crystal to bring back to Earth to help us to understand the structure of that protein, which ultimately then creates the drug. But you're taking it this whole stage further, actually manufacturing a drug at scale enough to return to Earth. And I think that's where this whole idea of what we've invested in space for so long is really now starting to reap the benefits. We've benefited to a certain extent back on Earth because we do have some drugs under trial because of protein crystals grown in space. But what you're doing is just, I think, absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, when are you hoping for the first drug? Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
But when are you hoping for the first actual drug that you can make in space? Will you have to do a clinical trial of that because of the way it's being manufactured?
So we'll be taking drugs that have already been through the approval process and then turning them into a crystal. So it's an accelerated approval process. So rather than the traditional 7-10 years, it will be more like 3 years to go through certain toxicity studies. So it will be much sooner. I think still within the sort of 7-year timeline earliest, because we have to become regulated. There's lots of challenges ahead. But it is because of the work that's been done by astronauts that even enabled this. It's the findings of those science experiments that then it's like, hang on, is there another use case for these crystals? It's like actually using the crystal as the drug, not just for understanding the structure itself. So in this scale, exactly as you say, Helen, but I'd say about 7 to 10 years, we should see it like actually being injected commercially. Clinical trials will be a little sooner than that.
But next year you want to actually do tests in space, is that right?
Correct. So we've got our first launch in June next year with our proof of concept manufacturing line. So this is all built with scale up in mind. So testing the fundamental features that then will enable the multi-ton production later down the line, but we had to go a step at a time.
And it's is it like a little module that goes on a SpaceX rocket?
It's exactly that. So we've actually called it Baby Boxy because it's the smallest in the family. So it's our little baby. It's about the size of a shoebox. And it's a continuous production line, which hasn't been done in space before. So starting small, sending Baby Boxy into space June next year, and then we'll be making crystals in space and then seeing how that has worked in our reactor and then scale up after that.
All right, we talked a little bit about the effects of space travel on the body. What about on the mind? We hear about the overview effect that astronauts often talk about, and I was really struck by William Shatner when he came back and said, I think he was the oldest person in space when he was 91, I think, when he came back. And instead of being
and when he went, he didn't go for very long.
No, it was really, it was barely just scraped and down again. But what was interesting was even he thought, look, I've played Captain Kirk for 30 years. I'm all about boldly going into space. But he just felt grief when he looked back on Earth and realized it really hit him. And he thought, what have we been doing? Looking out, we should be looking in and saving our planet. But what was the effect on you mentally?
I mean, when I went into space in 91, I was already aware that the Earth is pretty fragile. And of course, yes, you see with your own eyes that how much it's obviously interconnected. So of course, what we do on one side of the world must affect the others. You can see the swirls of the clouds going from one hemisphere to another almost, and swirls of plankton in the sea, and how the rivers bring the silt from the mountains and out into the sea. So it's obviously all interconnected. And I think that then gives you that understanding that we do have an impact, whatever we do. But I think different people are aware of different aspects of it. I came back very much aware of the idea of human relationships. When we look back on the Earth, as a crew, we would all together sometimes just open the biggest window. I say open because we had a hatch on the outside, but we'd open that biggest window and just all 5 of us gather around it and look out. And what we would talk about was not the beauty of the mountains, although they are beautiful, right? And not the gorgeous blue seas, but when we flew over parts of the Earth where we knew people were living then, we would talk about those individual people. So it's our families, our friends, our colleagues. It's that human relationship that is the emotional tie to Earth. And it made me realise actually how, when I got back from space, what I had not thought about, and I hadn't once thought of the material stuff that I either owned or I aspired to own. None of it was important. I had all the things around me that I needed to survive in space, to live reasonably comfortably. The thing I was missing was that variety of human relationships that we get on Earth. It made me realise how much we do together. And it was because of all that it was able, I couldn't have gone into space on my own, of course. So it makes us, enables us to do all the stuff we can, but it's the individuals working together that do it.
I've just remembered we did a piece in New Scientist on what's your favourite element. I think it was the anniversary of the periodic table or something, and we asked loads of famous people, what's your favourite element? But I asked Helen, and she said oxygen, and it just makes sense, because that's all you need. That's all you need when you're in that tin up there.
It's only because you told me I couldn't have any rare earths because they'd already been chosen.
Spoil the story. Body stuff.
Yeah, so studies have shown the impact on the body. I mean, Helen, you beautifully described what it's like just spending a few days in space, but studies looking at people spending months in space, the impacts are really extreme. As Irene mentioned, astronauts lose bone density and muscle because of the microgravity, and the higher levels of radiation in space seem to cause cell and DNA damage. Can you talk a little bit about the range of impacts that there are on the body?
So there are a lot. There are many. Can I also add a quick thing about, NASA found 5 hazards to human space flight. Confinement and distance from Earth are some of them. So they play with the psychology. The others are more related to the physiology. Gravity, so changes in gravity. It's not just microgravity when you're in space, it's also high gravity during launch and re-entry. Those could be quite damaging. Radiation, and we have not really worked out how to protect astronauts from radiation. So there are quite a lot of things that happen in space. If we look at gravity, which is what I'm interested in mainly, right now, gravity is affecting your bodies. It's a friend because essentially you are fighting against gravity, and that makes your muscle and your bones stronger. If that load is gone, so you don't have that force on you, your muscles, your bones become weaker. And that's why usually International Space Station mission nowadays is about 6 months. It may change because of the launch and re-entry rockets, but usually 6 months. So it takes about a few months for astronauts to have their rehabilitation and recovery after, and some of them don't even return to pre-launch levels. Astronaut trains, because you love training, Helen, astronauts, to avoid muscle and bone wasting, astronaut trains for about 2 hours every day on the International Space Station. They also do cardiovascular training. Because of what Helen said, gravity makes fluid shifts from the lower limb to the head. So that affects performance. It's also affecting, for some reason we don't know well, vision. So essentially gravity may affect the eye itself, so it makes it bigger, and that affects vision in space. So people tend to lose some of their vision. And that is when everything goes okay. It's not problematic, if there is a problem. So there are loads of adaptations. The reason why I said seasickness is because quite quickly, for example, inner ear which is the way we stand or we move around. Because it works with gravity, the crystals in the inner ear, when there is no gravity, when it's altered, you start having sickness, motion sickness. So some people get nauseous, maybe not you, but some people get nauseous launch and re-entry, especially when there is those transitions in gravity. Human body is not made for space, but we are trying to adapt it and to explore further. So there are loads of changes, not to mention, as you said, DNA damage, skin damage, aging. These are more related to radiation. And there was the twin study, which is a study that was done by NASA a few years ago. I don't know if you're aware. Funny enough, they were lucky enough to have two twins.
Identical twins, right?
Identical twin. Yeah. And one was sent to space and one was kept on Earth for a year. And they tried to compare the effect of space on identical astronauts. The results are something else happened to their lives. So the results are a bit unclear, but you can see definite aging as an effect of space flight in the astronaut that was able to go to space.
We've got to be very careful. It was a sample size of like one person in space, and he had such a stressful time after he returned to Earth that he aged more after he returned to Earth than he did in space. There's a whole load, really. There's a whole load of we've got to be very careful of what we're comparing.
I totally agree. That's why I said a lot happened in their both lives, and therefore the whole study was, for example, cut short because of these events, and what was published is limited and probably affected by other factors. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do like, it's not a science story, but about Scott Kelly. So when he came back after a year on the ISS, I remember in his autobiography it says when he finally got back home, still in his flight suit, he walked all the way through his house into the pool and just jumped in his pool, all still in the flight suit, just to get into water after a year, not be able to even wash your face properly, just to immerse yourself.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why not going to space, showering.
You can have wet wipes, right?
It's quite affordable.
For a year, though.
A year.
Yeah.
When you all smell the same, Rowan, it's,
Yeah. Might you lose your sense of smell, perhaps, do you?
Well, you don't smell, or your brain doesn't recognise the smell because you've got it all around you all the time. So it's obviously no open window to get a bit of fresh air. So your brain doesn't recognise it.
Food tastes different, doesn't it? Because they spend a lot of time really trying to pimp up the food that astronauts eat these days.
Food doesn't taste as strong, and we think it's to do with this fluid shift that even though it seems to settle mostly, as Irene says, with our eyes, it doesn't really settle. Our eyes can often remain slightly different in shape, but also we think there's an extra fluid that remains at the back of our throats, for instance. So normally when you swallow, you get some of the aroma molecules will go up the back of your throat into your nose, so you actually smell even when you swallow. So we think that maybe that's one of the reasons why astronauts' sense of taste seems to diminish while they're in space.
Wow.
But to be quite honest, space food is actually so repetitive and fairly dull that's another reason they just want variety. Yeah.
And a lot of the changes, even in what they observed in Scott Kelly, seemed to reverse quite quickly after he got back as well. Did you find the physical effects change quickly once you got back?
Well, 8 days in space, I think you're right, 7 days and 23 hours or whatever, but yeah, it's not enough really to have noticeably weakened bones, weakened muscles. Yeah. For me, the biggest thing was just feeling weight. You mentioned how the idea of being immersed in water, or perhaps it was actually also the idea of floating. So I just remember feeling so heavy for a while. It only lasted a few minutes, really, probably about half an hour. But when I lifted up my little finger, it felt heavy. I was noticing the weight of it. But then, of course, every time I did lift my little finger, there were signals going to my brain to teach it already that there was weight. I remember standing up. I was a little bit wobbly, balance system, getting used to it, everything again. But then when I wanted to walk, I lifted up my leg, right, as you do when you want to walk, and my leg felt heavy. And so my natural reaction was, I'm lifting up something heavy. I must lean over to one side to counterbalance. And so I was walking in this very, very sort of lopsided way. But it only took about 20 or so paces So like to teach my brain again that I can balance like one leg, just lift it straight up and down and walk in a straight line. So again, it's this adaptability and just, yeah. But no, a few days in space, we don't really notice a big difference.
A few years ago, I was lucky enough to collect some data on astronauts that have been in space for the typical 6 months of the ISS nowadays. And the message is use it or lose it, and use it in advance. So the idea is the astronaut that was fitter before launch was actually recovering a lot better after their mission. And the astronaut that actually trained a bit more during the mission was better, so had a better recovery. So essentially, you get out whatever you put in this sort of thing. So, yeah. But the countermeasures that the scientists and the space agencies have developed are very much targeted to missions on the International Space Station. If we now think about going to the Moon and Mars, we need to rethink what we are doing in space.
And can I ask, actually, I know the countermeasures for muscle and bone, it's pretty good protocols, like 2 hours a day, which is a lot of exercise, but it works. What about balance? Because isn't there, that takes a little bit longer to come back, is that correct?
So muscle bones are actually the ones that take the longest in terms of recovery. Some people really struggle with that. Balance, so for example, the inner ear, the vestibular system, tend to come back within a few days. It's just recalibrating the inner ear, the vestibular system, just needs a bit more gravity, just needs the right signal, and then it calibrates correctly. But yes, it's quite debilitating because you get nauseous, and people think, "Oh my God, I'm going to die here."
But not everybody. It's about half,
exactly.
isn't it?
And that's one of my research questions: why some and some others don't?
And you can't predict it.
Well, you can, I think, to a certain extent. So the Russians will say that the prediction is to do with motion sickness on Earth, not totally, but this spinning chair that we've seen, so a bit like, so I don't think, I can spin this chair. So if I just spin this chair round, and as I'm spinning round, I won't because I'll knock the microphone off, but as you're spinning round, imagine you're also moving your head from your knees and then back up straight. And then you'll be asked to spin as it's spinning round, to move your head left to right. So you're just confusing that vestibular system completely. Now, if you tend to feel nauseous doing that, then the Russians will say you're likely, but it's not completely guaranteed to feel nauseous in space. Now, I was always absolutely fine on this, and I could just do it. It's nothing clever. It's just the way I am. And I think it's perhaps to do with the balance. If your ears are very, very similar to each other, then you get similar on either side. And if you somehow, it's easier for your brain to look after.
One of my research questions is to actually test people who have vestibular loss and try to understand if they are better off because they don't have that input. So for when you move around, that sort of thing, there are three main inputs. The inner ear, yes, for sure. Eyes, so vision, but also what's called somatosensation, so muscle, joints, sensors in the skin, all of that. So if I test people without a vestibular input in space.
So for deaf people?
No,
does that mean?
It's vestibular deficit. They could hear, some could, some can, some can't.
Oh, so it's the balance they've already...
Exactly. So it's essentially relying on the other two inputs without the third one, so it doesn't get confused in space. Are they better off? I don't know, but nobody is going to give me the money to do that. So
when I close my eyes in space, and in fact, when I first opened my eyes in the morning, before I opened my eyes, being still just half asleep, I felt as though I was upside down, and that was because my body. The only information was the fluid pressure. So back on Earth, I would have been upside down if my brain had felt so full of fluid. But I was getting none of the normal up and down. So we do rely on so many different inputs. And again, that adaptability.
Exactly.
We mentioned radiation a little bit. It made me think, Katie, is that a factor in drug manufacture? Does that, mess up the medicines?
Less so for us because we're not dealing with anything that's alive. We're not dealing with cells.
Still proteins, though, isn't it?
And they're okay with the radiation. The temperature is more of a problem for us because if you get above a certain temperature, they start to denature, and we don't want that. So it's very, very strict temperature control. But really it's a material science problem that we have to engineer in terms of how can we order and crystallize this material that just so happens to be a protein to make these crystals. But radiation is less of a problem.
Okay. And can you simulate microgravity at all, or do you just have to get up there?
You can in parts. You can have drop towers where you can drop your experiment and you get a few seconds, or the vomit comets, the parabolic flights, which I'd love to. Did you do one?
Oh, I did a few. They're great. Fantastic.
Did you vomit comet? No. That's good. And yes, so you can do those, which gives you about 20 seconds of microgravity, but that's not long enough to grow these crystals. So you can test some fluid control to see, okay, how does the hardware function? But in terms of actual product manufacture, it's not long enough or the right quality of microgravity. Okay. So there's only one option for us.
And what about the spillover benefits of the stuff you're doing? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the main one, value proposition, is in terms of taking cancer treatments and enabling them for an at-home treatment. That's a big one to decrease the burden on the healthcare system. You don't need as many nurses to do the infusions. They can then be free to treat other patients. But it's also to do with crystals being really thermally stable. So you don't need the cold storage and cold supply chains. I don't know if you remember during COVID, but there were big issues with the transportation of these vaccines at the cryo temperatures. If in crystalline form, you don't need those really low temperatures, so it makes it much easier, cheaper to transport, and also to lots of countries where it's very difficult to transport to. These drugs are much more stable. So you've got lots of different benefits that can come just from that material form of the drug.
Wow. So, I mean, space exploration has, when you sort of read about the breakthroughs that we've had from the development of materials and things for space exploration, NASA sort of lists all sorts of things from memory foam and scratch resistant lenses to CAT scans and artificial limbs. I was reading about a thing called artificial muscles, where they use electrical impulses to create movement on robotic arms and things like that. But even more generally, a lot of the technology that's used for artificial limbs and prosthetics can be traced back to materials like durable plastics and things that were developed in space. But Irene, I think you might know a little bit more about this in terms of, you've been working with John McFall. So you mentioned earlier the ESA fly mission, the project. Could you tell us a little bit about him and what the project is?
So yes, John is the astronaut that's been selected for this fly mission. The fly mission is the first mission with an astronaut with a physical impairment. John is an para-athlete, is British, so the only astronaut with a physical impairment is going to be British, by the way. He lost a part of his right lower limb in a motorbike accident in his teens. He has an amputation just above the right knee. So for that project, for example, the European Space Agency is developing, in collaboration with other manufacturers, 3 prostheses for different tasks in space. And hopefully, I'm not involved with the prosthesis design, but hopefully that design can be translated into, for example, activities on Earth for people to access different activities, from swimming to skydiving to all that sort of thing. So those are the developments at the moment for the mission. John, as of February this year, 2025, has been cleared for a full mission medically. So he's training right now. We probably have seen him on social media. And essentially, he's training exactly like any other astronaut in the European Space Agency and NASA core. And he's just waiting for a mission, which is what everybody seems to be doing, I guess, waiting for that call. There are some extra preparations, but yes, we're really excited, and hopefully in a couple of years, we're going to be here to see the launch.
And you mentioned earlier that you had a hypothesis that some physical impairments might be advantageous. So is part of this to try to prove or disprove that?
So every hypothesis is there to be tested. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. The idea is based on what we know about the human body in space. So from a scientific point of view, what we have with John, we're going to have one astronaut. Going back to that twin study, they had what we call an NO2, so 2 astronauts. Here we're going to have 1 astronaut. Yay. Which is amazing. So it's a fantastic opportunity. So what we have done, we decided to go the other way around. So we have 1 astronaut. We are testing the whole physiological response. I'm really, really fortunate that people, experts in brain, adaptations, muscle adaptation, bone adaptations, temperature adaptations in space, and also oxidative stress adaptations are all come together in our team, and we're working together. So essentially, we're gonna test these astronauts from a full physiological perspective to understand the adaptation of all these body systems, and then compare to other astronauts. And that is quite important also because think about when you talk about William Shatner, space tourism. The training, the Helen loved, is very different for somebody who goes to space for a few minutes or even for a few hours. So the training and the recruitment is very different. We need to be ready also for that. It's a slightly different element here, but we have sent to space so far people with Parkinson's. We've sent people who are a bit older than the traditional astronaut. So we need to be ready. We need to have the science ready for that.
And do you think there will be a lot of spillover benefits from this sort of research for people on Earth with disabilities?
So we believe so. Just for awareness, we put together what we call the King's College London Space for All team. And essentially, we realized very quickly that as researcher and as academic, we knew something, but we didn't know enough. So we pulled together people with different impairments. They came to our workshops. We learned together. We learned how to ask questions, how to get people involved, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. And one thing that we quickly realized is not enough people with a disability work, for example, in the space agency. There are a few, but not enough. So we are thinking about how can we train new people, how can we open up opportunities for people with disabilities to be employed in these fields. And therefore, they say, not asking silly questions, starting from an ability perspective rather than a disability perspective. So we think that that sort of work will then translate in adaptations for different types of disabilities on Earth, not just from a technological perspective, but also from a societal perspective and an opportunity perspective.
What about for long-term missions, and particularly on the moon and then maybe later on Mars? There's some real problems there, and we've talked about radiation, and that's really going to be the problem. How are we going to solve that, and is it worth the risk? Should we not just send robots up to those places?
Yeah, so robots are great, and they can do a whole load of things, of course, that humans actually can't do very well. So robots are sometimes, it's amazing what we call sort of sensory acuity. So they can detect sometimes almost like one molecule. There's no way a human being would be able to do that, for instance. But on the other hand, humans are better at being flexible, and they're more mobile. Humans can see things that they've not been taught to look for instance. Robots are much more, they can do a certain task repeatedly, right? And they'll do it exactly the same task, and they don't get bored, and they don't need much life support to do it. Whereas, humans have just got, we're much more dexterous. We can operate complex machinery, for instance, if we want to do some drilling. So humans are much better at that flexibility and mobility, and we can travel greater distances in a unit of time. So I think the best thing is, of course, to combine the robots and the humans. Yes, it's great to send the robots first, so we get the understanding of the safety and a bit of the environment that we're going into.
They can dig big holes for us to live in.
Well, yes, you're right. Partly it's going to be a question of when we arrive, how can we protect ourselves? But hopefully we'll have got some new wonderful materials that maybe somebody like Katie will have produced in space that we can make our spacesuits out of, and also be able to 3D print some habitats. But yeah, maybe use the regolith or whatever to live underneath to give some sort of protection from the radiation. But yeah, I think it's that combination of robots and humans.
I think one of my favourite experiments that's on Mars is something called MOXIE, taking the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then turning it into oxygen. And I mean, it's not magic, it's science. But then to collect it so that then when astronauts come, we're learning how we can then harness oxygen for the astronauts to breathe. And I remember reading about that and I just thought, wow, that's so exciting. And humans built that. It's not like that just came out of nowhere. That's human minds working together to think, okay, this is the problem we need to solve. How can we fix it? And then engineer to make that happen. And I remember feeling really inspired by that experiment.
So I think one of the reasons that experiment happened was Jeff Hoffman, who's an astronaut, who actually, I think he did his PhD. He certainly did some studying at Leicester in the UK. But anyway, Jeff was certainly key in the project. One of the problems we have in space station is too much CO2. So we don't hear much about it because astronauts tend to live, say we're very adaptable, but the CO2 levels are easily 3, 4, 5 times higher than we would deem safe to normally work on Earth. So they were at a level where most people on Earth would say, it's a bit stuffy, I've got a bit of a headache. We need to open a window, we need to reduce some people here. Well, you can't open a window on a space station. You can't reduce the people here. Well, not legally anyway, right? So I think so for Jeff's idea of the CO2 being the big problem, if you can remove it and use it, even better.
Right, let's talk about the future. This is Space 75, so it's looking to 50 years into the future. And I want to ask each of you what you're excited about the future. And let's take that in 2 parts, like something in the near future and then something in 2075, like paint us a picture. So do you want to go first, Helen?
Oh, so in that order, if I go, because I'll go, if I'll do it in the other order. So 2075, I would go humans on Mars.
Yeah, you'd hope so by then.
Well, by then.
Yeah.
So we should have. It should be. Won't say relatively easy, but we'll have seen humans there. We'll be visiting Mars. We'll be using it and maybe doing things there that we can't even do on the moon. So just fantastic. That's my real hope for the long-term future in that respect. But much shorter. I think it's about. What gets me very excited actually is I talked about how it's about human beings and how we work together. Well, actually, it's that. We can be so innovative. I mean, we've just heard from a couple of really innovative people here, how we can take our thoughts in different directions and use that for the benefits of people on Earth. So I think it's that innovation and how we will work together collaboratively to implement solutions that really will make the whole of the world and elsewhere a better place.
Yeah. Irene?
Right. That's difficult now.
What she said.
You would have said that, I know.
No. So one thing that I think I wanted to say tonight is, and it's not science, I don't know if you know, but the International Space Station is considered the best peacekeeping initiative in humankind. So I wish that in a few years, in the short term, we have a mission where we come together again. And then we collaborate for a common goal. I know that space development has been between collaboration and competition, so 2 elements are part of it, but that's probably my short-term idea. Obviously, a bit medium-term will be to have a first astronaut with physical impairment. I'm a bit selfish there, not because I want to do the science only, but because I think it's important. Certainly going to Mars, I'm not a fan of the term colonization, but trying to live elsewhere, probably to realize how important, how great is living on Earth. So I think space tends to help with mind shifts a little, so I hope it's delivers on that in the next few years.
Yeah, I'd say for me it's a little closer to home. So it's about low Earth orbit and how we're using that space for Earth. So I think in the near term, I'm excited to see how the infrastructure is changing and how the logistics is changing. So there's, as an example, there's a company building effectively petrol stations for satellites where they can come and refuel and carry on going to increase their lifespan. And others that are tugs to move satellites from one orbit to another. And I think that's a really exciting space. And again, for what we're doing, it's the re-entry vehicles, so the satellites that will contain manufacturing payloads and experiments that will orbit, no humans involved, and then come back down to Earth. I'm really excited for what that opens up and for what innovations that then makes space for. And I'd say then slightly further afield, I think humans, but in low Earth orbit, we will have many, many commercial space stations. I think by that point, well, there's already about 4 or 5 being planned in the near term. So I think by the 2075, there'll be many more. So I can imagine that we have a much larger human presence in low Earth orbit, a lot more scientists in space. And that's what I get excited about. So previously it would be your fighter pilots who are then trained on the science to go into space, because you need to have that be able to deal with the emergencies and a lot of the parts that the military's trained them in. But now it's becoming easier to train to go to space. So now you can have the scientists who have spent decades training, where you have that human intuition of, oh yeah, something's not quite right with that cell or something. You could train them to be astronauts, and then they can use their expertise in space. So I'm really excited about that shift in the near future.
That is exciting. More scientists everywhere, but especially in space.
That's what
Brilliant.
we want.
We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. That's all we've got time for. Thank you to the Royal Society for hosting us tonight. Thank you to our guests, Helen Sharman, Irene Di Giulio, and Katie King. Thanks to our brilliant audience. Thanks to you listening at home. And do subscribe to The World, the Universe and Us. Thanks very much, everyone, and bye for now.